In a world where CVEs are documented and every bug has a bounty, a DevOps team will test and prod and awaken an ancient evil. Coming this Halloween, Hell LVM. The compiler has given its last warning. Which means this week we chat with Doug Dooley from Data Theorem about bringing clarity to the confusion that lies within cloud security frameworks. In the news segment, whistling past Twitter's grave security, LastPass loses source, a culture of threat modeling, signing versus security, and more. Treat warnings as errors, and stay tuned for Application Security Weekly.
This is Security Weekly, for security professionals, by security professionals. It's the show to learn the latest tools, techniques, and processes necessary to understand DevOps, application security, and cloud security. Your trusted source for the latest application security news. It's time for Application Security Weekly.
The shift to remote and hybrid work over the past 2 years has accelerated application development on cloud infrastructure. However, securing these new assets has lagged behind. Qualys Cloud View, the next generation cloud security posture management, delivers an end-to-end multi-cloud security and compliance solution encompassing the entire application lifecycle from build to runtime. Cloud View enables enterprises to assess their cloud security and compliance posture, identify risks and gaps, auto-remediate issues, proactively enforce best practices, improve compliance and audits rapidly and efficiently. Identify your most vulnerable cloud assets by visiting securityweekly.com/Qualys. Businesses need API protection that goes beyond signature matching and can stay ahead of attackers and their various tactics and tools. They need a solution that is more patient and prepared than a modern attacker and can track their actions over time. ThreatX is the only API attack protection platform that delivers on the promise of stopping API attacks in real time while giving you the visibility you need to prepare for future attacks. To learn more, visit securityweekly.com/ThreatX. Contrast Security secures the code that global business relies on. It is the industry's most modern and comprehensive code security platform, removing security roadblock inefficiencies and empowering enterprise developers to write and release secure application code faster. The Contrast platform automatically detects vulnerabilities while developers write code, eliminates false positives, and provides how-to-fix guidance for easy and fast vulnerability remediation. Learn more about the Contrast platform at securityweekly.com/contrast security. This is episode 210, recorded August 29th, 2022. I'm your host, Mike Shima, and I'm here with John, Mr. Blue Hair now, Kinsella. Hello, John.
Good morning. It's fun. The blue hair's fun. I've had this for about a week. The psychological effect on people of like who actually will like when they first see me go, "Is your hair different?" versus some people like wait a while and go like, "Hey, is that a filter?"
No, just practical effects this week. No CGI yet. But we also have Joe South. Hello, Joe.
How's it going?
It's going quite well. I'm looking forward to finishing up my spec script for the LLVM and the address satanizer. But we also have some announcements to get through real quick. Security Weekly is proud to partner with HackRedCon for their first annual in-person event. HackRedCon is happening at the Hyatt Regency in Louisville, Kentucky from September 7th through 11th. Listeners receive a 10% discount on registration. Visit securityweekly.com/HackRedCon to register now. We hope to see you there. Do you have a specific guest or topic that you want us to cover on one of the shows? Submit your suggestions at securityweekly.com/guests. We review suggestions monthly and will reach out to you once reviewed. Doug is the Chief Operating Officer of Data Theorem. He heads up product strategy, marketing, sales, and customer success teams. Before joining Data Theorem, he worked in venture capital, leading investments of cloud-centric security, machine learning, and infrastructure startups for Venrock. Prior to Venrock, Doug spent almost 2 decades as an entrepreneur and technology executive at some of the most innovative and market-dominant technology infrastructure companies, ranging from large corporations such as Cisco and Intel to security and virtualization startups such as Neoterras, NetScreen, and RingCube. Hello, Doug, and thank you for joining us.
Hi, guys. Thanks for having me.
Happy to have you here to talk about some cloud security and especially some frameworks. We'll dive into what some of those frameworks are in a little bit, but just want to start off with when we talk about cloud security, cloud native security, those are easy buzzwords, easy frames of reference, if you will. But when we start to talk about cloud security frameworks, what are some of the things that we should be keeping in mind? And here I'm asking in the sort of, there's security that everybody has to do regardless of cloud or not. And then those aspects that, we're in the cloud. We need to do something new and different.
Yeah, no, that's a great segue, Mike, on this topic. And what we've noticed is, like, we were at Black Hat just recently, and we did a little kind of closed session, under friend DAs with a lot of our existing customers and some new customers. And we really kind of just started to talk more candidly about where everybody is in their journey on the cloud security program, right? Because depending on your organization, you could be born in the cloud, right? Be pure cloud native. You've never had a data center or infrastructure. And then, of course, you have people still dragging their mainframes with them, with their on-prem data centers, and then they're trying to make that migration to the cloud. I think COVID and the pandemic kind of put business pressure on everybody to be like, look, let's be more zero trust if we're not, and let's use more public cloud services if we're not, because the cost of having people physically rack and stack and fix servers when things go wrong, people are starting to notice the businesses that are not doing that anymore have a huge agility advantage. And the businesses that are still doing that, yes, there are high costs, but there's also just the speed at which you can take a business idea and turn it into a digital reality. You're just slower. Like, there's just no way around it. DevOps teams are rock star teams because they can take someone's business idea and turn it into reality much faster than most other digital teams or IT teams that are out there right now. So I think that is sort of where we are as an industry. And then really, like, the security groups are really good about helping each other, like being real about what is working, what is not working, what's been helpful, what's not been helpful. And I think that's part of what this discussion should probably be about.
Yeah. Especially we'll try for what's been working rather than tell people what hasn't been working and not recommend that. Yeah. But to some of your point too, a lot of what I like about the cloud and what I think are the benefits of how DevOps teams can benefit from some of the speed, some of those points you touched on, is because of the amount of abstraction. I'm going to hand wave a little bit and say everything can become as code, infrastructure as code, code as code. I don't know how good we are at security as code yet. But if I'm looking at the OWASP top 10, they have a cloud native application security list. That's not quite a framework yet. We're getting there, but one of their entries is just injection flaws. That's inescapable. That in a way has nothing to do with the cloud, I think. But then their first one, however, is insecure cloud container or orchestration configuration. So already we're just talking about not necessarily even the application code, we're just talking about the environment itself. So what are some of the ways then, if we just talk about that configuration aspect, how do DevOps teams become those experts in the Azure-specific configurations, AWS, GCP? I'm sure I'll be kind, somebody out there using Oracle, but these configuration issues, these are new things to learn. What are the frameworks, or what are some of those lessons that they can take to so that they are secure?
Yeah, I mean, look, I think most of us on this call have probably 10 or 20 years of experience in the security industry. And we remember when we used to spend a lot of our time just hardening systems, right? Like, whether it was a Windows server hardening or even a Linux server hardening, maybe Solaris back in the day. But the reality of this idea of configs, best practices on configs, is you can configure your AWS environment to be as free and easily accessible to develop features on as possible. But the trade-off is oftentimes in test and dev, if you're leaving everything wide open, here's a classic example, S3 buckets, publicly readable and writable with no authentication, right? Like, well, if I'm just playing around, it's scratch storage for me to be able to build features on top. It makes a lot of sense. As that test dev moves into acceptance, as it moves into staging, pre-production, then production, as it sort of flows into sort of becoming more mission critical, do those configs tighten up and change and start to harden? So I think, going back to one of our close friends, Jason Chan over at Netflix, right? These guys were the poster childs for DevOps. Chan's team did a really good job of building something called Security Monkey. And then I went and invested a company called Evident.io, which is really like just supercharging, Python scripts to look for config mistakes, right? If if you're leaving S3 buckets open without authentication and they're writable on the public internet, I mean, you're asking for a lot of trouble, right? And how many headlines have we seen over and over again of a company sort of saying there's been this massive API breach, and one of the things that went wrong was the storage layer of the cloud was left unauthenticated and wide open for attack, right? Or at least for data extraction. So just take a step back. Is config hardening or config validation, posture management an important thing? Yes, I think it's absolutely important. There's a part of people who are saying, like, why doesn't Amazon just do this for free, or Azure, or GCP, or Alibaba, or like whoever the cloud provider is? Why aren't they giving all of these best practice security verification for free? And the truth is, I think many of them do offer different levels of quote unquote free to check your best practices on configs. And they actually, in some cases, make it really hard for you to open these things up. And if you've tried to build an app recently and you try to make your S3 bucket readable and writable publicly, they make it not that easy to do that anymore, right? So it's not like they have, their defaults are to try to keep these things secure. But there's always this balancing act that developers are trying to deliver features quickly, right? 2-week sprints. The Scrum teams have a lot of pressure to get out these features. And so, opening things up in order for innovation to happen, you can empathize why a developer or DevOps team is kind of, you could argue, softening these hardened best practices on security, right? Least privilege access, all that kind of stuff. So, that if you take a step back, that is a good thing that we're doing this kind of posture management, but it's very incomplete for a security program, right? Posture management, checking configs, that's the first step usually, but that's pretty far from a good, solid security program for cloud.
Yeah, I think, and we've even seen some of those aspects with GCP was one of the first to harden their metadata service just against SSRF flaws, and then AWS, it took the I'll say there's a cause and effect here. It took the Capital One breach for AWS to say, maybe we should actually improve and harden that our metadata service so it's resistant to SSRF. But I think what the Wiz folks are kind of pointing out too is no one's really tracking those effectively. And even if the cloud service providers say, here's our new secure default, they don't retroactively apply it across the board to all the existing services out there. So you've hit a great point on the configuration. And all we've talked about is just using the cloud environment itself. We haven't even talked about yet what the applications are doing or how the applications are talking to each other. So maybe, I think Joe's got something. Let's, what question do you have?
Yeah, what I have run into a lot is organizations tend to move into the cloud faster than they think about security. And so it puts the security team in a position of not just catching up, but now they have to resell security to the developers, right? Because the developers have had free reign in the cloud for sometimes years, and with very minimal security restrictions. And then, out of the blue, security finds out about it. I was working at a place where I was told day one we were heavily into AWS, and we were. I asked specifically about Azure and GCP, and I was told no. Well, when I asked the right developer, they said, oh, no, we're pretty heavy into Azure. We're almost just as much in Azure as we are at AWS. And a couple months later, I find out it's the same case in GCP. And so it's like the organization kind of needs to be retrained in hey, the cloud is basically another data center. We need to secure it as such. And you shouldn't be moving into this thing without telling us that you're moving into it.
Yeah. No, Joe, and you're bringing up a great point. One of the things that we try to pride ourselves at Data Theorem is we also not only want to be a technical bridge between DevOps and security, we want to be a cultural bridge. And so here's the culture, right? Because of Himanshu's background from AtStake and ISEC, he's been always on the red side, the offensive side of security. I've been mostly on the defensive side of security, right? But whether it's offense or defense, we're security people. So culturally, we align with our brothers and sisters in IT security. Part of what we have to teach our brothers and sisters is we have to embrace automation, right? The kids in DevOps grew up with automation first, right? So they were doing massive scale out, scale downs of infrastructure daily. because that's how they were taught to spin up the environment to deal with load and spin it all back down, this ephemeral compute, right? We didn't grow up that way in security, right? Matter of fact, an auto rule in an IDS or IPS was scary for us, right? Because it was like, oh, this looks like a NIMDA attack. Go ahead and auto block it on the firewall rule. And it's like, oh no, you just blocked legit traffic. Now you've caused the business to go bad. They're going to fire security people, right? So we've always been terrified of high degrees of automation. So one of the first cultural things security people have to do to be a part of the DevOps party is embrace automation, right? And that's not always easy. Example would be, when we have our security customers or prospects log into the product, they try to download things like have a PDF or a spreadsheet where they want to host a meeting to talk about this vulnerability they found. That already irritates DevOps, because to a DevOps person, it's just a bug. It's one of like 10 classes of bugs they have to deal with, or potentially a feature. And so what we need to do is we need to show up like a Jira ticket, or show up like a Slack alert, like something that's already in the flow of what DevOps is doing. And we're just one more thing they got to go work on, or one more thing that they can go auto correct or auto fix. And if we can get to the point where, here's an example. If we know there's a data store that has PII on it, it's unauthenticated and it's exposed on the internet, like nobody would refute we should fix this, right? Like the simple thing was like turn authentication back on, right? Like that could be the simplest, easiest fix. That should be fully automated, and the alert should be it's been fixed. Now, if you still want to roll it back for whatever business reason you want to roll it back, fine. But we just closed the door and locked it, right? Because it's 3:00 in the morning. Why is the door wide open, right? But that is the mindset I think security has to get really comfortable with when you're working with DevOps. Is they're running so fast, they're doing so many global changes with code that even if you're a security person who's not fluent in writing code, and there's a lot of security people who don't write code, right? Let's be honest. That's part of that cultural, like we have to work more like the way DevOps works versus have DevOps operate like the way security thinks, right? So that's and here's one other thing that I have to bring up. Whenever I hear our brothers and sisters in security go, why do they write that so insecurely? It's like, are you under the pressure of delivering a feature every week? It's not that, we have to also walk in their shoes a little bit of what DevOps is up against, right? The cadence at which they operate is so fast that we also have to go, okay, look, they have a lot of pressure. We have to help provide safety rails to allow that train to go fast, right? Because that train is moving quick with or without us. We need to be like lubricant safety guardrails to help them from crashing and hurting the business and hurting all of us. And then I always say this next side to the DevOps team is like, hey, DevOps, even if you don't think security is your top issue, the moment you have a data breach, it will become your top issue, right? Like I've seen it happen. Once you've been breached, you thought security wasn't your top issue. Now everybody in the company says security is their top issue. So like, that's at the heart of it. We're trying to help, until the stock price bounces back or something, right?
Let me jump in there real quick, Doug. I think I want to go two places. One, I want to give 2 seconds, or call it 20 seconds, to there's a problem on the other side, right? Of not just the security guy didn't want to automate anything, but you also get the type of security folks that like everything must be secure. And the next thing you know, you're having to do 2-factor authentication just to, open a door to go to the bathroom. So there's some sort of balance that needs to be in there. And it's like you're touching base on the empathy. I mean, is what it comes down to on both sides, right? So the security people need to understand, hey, you got to update. And it's funny, I was thinking of, not meant in a snark, but as you were talking there, I was thinking, okay, well, there's security people out there somewhere that I'm sure are no longer, they're still not doing any automation. It's like, it'd be interesting thought experiment. Where are they and what type of gigs are they working at? But just listeners can think about that. But back on this, so the devs need to understand, or the security guys need to be able to automate a little more, be a little more open to automation of taking some of those risks. But also it's the developers need to understand, hey, we're moving those guys. They're getting better. Help us, work with them. But I think the final comment, I'm sort of curious your thoughts on both of these things. We're talking about two sort of ICs, really, right? Individual contributors. particularly in the example of the developers needing to, release. That's cool. They like doing that, but they're doing that because boss man, boss woman said we need to hit these milestones. So it's more that conversation needs to actually go back upstream as well, right? And actually say, hey, we need to hit these milestones, but also we need to do it in a secure manner. Do your customers resist when you tell them that?
Yeah. Well, I think I look at it a different way. Let's say you were a traditional media company and you had these massive data centers all around the world. And then this little company out of Los Gatos, Netflix, comes along and really starts to disrupt your business in ways that you could not foresee, right? Or you're an auto manufacturer and you've been building massive data centers around the globe as a auto manufacturer, and this tiny little Silicon Valley, auto company called Tesla comes around, and in both cases they have a culture of DevOps, right? They have a culture of these like very fast moving digital teams. And so I think the reality is, whether we like it or not, right, there's been disruption made by organizations that knew how to move quickly, particularly take a business idea, turn it into a digital, technological reality and keep iterating, right? That fast OODA loop is the cultural advantage that a lot of these tech first Silicon Valley companies or fintech companies, auto tech companies, or you just name it, right? If you put enough tech into it, they've become very disruptive to traditional businesses. And so the leaders of those traditional businesses are saying, hey guys, we got to go faster. This whole waterfall method where we make one major change into our digital stack a year, we have 3 maintenance windows a year where we do a bunch of patching. Like, I know that makes everybody feel comfortable, but that's not good enough. Like, we are being left behind year after year. We're trailing the organizations that are moving with a much more agility. So it's hard to put the genie back in the bottle and say, hey, let's go a little bit slower and more methodical so that we make less mistakes. I think it's a little bit of like, the trains are moving fast. How do we keep these trains safer? And I think that's the security component of that kind of DevSecOps. And again, it's not easy, but I think it's going to be hard to say, hey, everybody, let's slow down. It's like,
definitely hard to do that. And there's an aspect here where we dove in the beginning, just talking about just configuring securely the environment you're going into. Yeah. And if we say, you made a point too, just trying to connect with the developers where they work. Here's the Jira ticket. Here's the Slack channel. Yeah. But I do want to touch on, there's also a balance in the sense of one more thing from the security folks to fix. For example, if we look at the cloud controls matrix from Cloud Security Alliance, I don't think we can effectively, as security folks, come up and say, okay, I've got 197 items for you across 17 domains. Your next Scrum, your next DevOps, we're going to agilely, very quickly, do all 197 of these. So there still does have to be some aspect of ways to break down to some reactive controls where we're just looking after the fact for misconfigurations, but guardrails, those paved roads, to reference, Netflix again, they were pioneers of that kind of terminology, sharing a lot of their open source tools for that. So if we move beyond just the configuration, I'm going to guess some supply chain questions are in there because supply chain's everywhere. But what are some of these other broad categories of areas that security can't be forgotten, or that security and DevOps partnerships needs to be strengthened and can benefit from automation rather than just doing the old school way, if you will, of some checklists or sort of a waterfall approach to security?
Yeah, no, I think that's a great question, Mike. And so let's say first step is this kind of posture management check, right? So, some people call this security framework CSPM, Cloud Security Posture Management. Let's say that's the first step. Then the second step tends to be the artifact scanning part. So you basically push back into pre-prod, try to shift left as best as you can, and look for obvious things, like things that just, whether they're OWASP or CVs, like whatever you decide that you want to do. If you can look at it closer into the pre-prod environment, that's kind of going to be more classic DevSecOps, and AppSec teams are going to be more involved with that. But it can't be manual, and it can't be a bunch of like, we're going to train these developers to write more secure code. Like, as soon as you start saying this kind of stuff, these are relationship damaging moments, right? When you're telling a developer, you guys don't know how to write secure code, so we're going to put you through, this webinar, a multi-week training program on how to write more secure. Like, this is how you damage relationships between DevOps and security. So it's a different attitude. It's like, look, can we give you automation tools that will quickly just identify things with a certain confidence level? You guys decide if you're going to fix it. At the end of the day, it's a risk decision. You're either going to fix it or not, but we've opened the ticket. It's going to get assigned, whatever. And so that's sort of the left. So let's say code scanning as part of that artifact scanning aspect, that config analysis. And then the last part is runtime. So now I think another big mistake that has happened in IT security is they'll take their EDR agents and they'll take their enterprise firewalls and decide I can bring that from my data center and plop it into my public cloud and we'll be fine. Yeah, it's not hard rolling out a fleet of Linux agents onto Linux containers. Like, why would you do this, right? Why would you bring these old tools with you to this new environment because you're comfortable with using the old tools, right? And so the example with runtime, it's you have to have, again, a different set of cloud security centric runtime tools that are probably going to be a lot different than what were you using on-prem. So I think those are the three major aspects I've seen in really good programs. You know, they start with that config analysis for best practices. They go into that automated shift left, DevSecOps, CI/CD pipeline sort of scanning, and then they provide more runtime observability and some kind of, let's call it, protection controls in there. Now, you know the program's getting really strong is when things are being found in pre-prod, and when anything drifts out into prod, they're auto-fixing it. So whether it's a Terraform script or a CloudFormation script or some sort of automated mechanism where it doesn't just sit out there in runtime for a long time. As soon as it's caught and detected, it gets automatically fixed. Now, I'm not saying that makes security really comfortable, right? It's not in our traditional heritage to auto fix things in runtime, right? But if the risk is high enough, like, it's probably worth doing it. You know what I mean? So
yeah, and I think a lot of what you're describing too is it sounds like application security teams, cloud security teams, perhaps laying out a journey, figuring out we should start with some pre-prod, start with some configurations. What can we do to mature this over time? What kind of references are there certain, to use the word frameworks, are there frameworks, references that are often helpful for teams that they can look at and say, well, rather than figure out, we tackling all these 197 items at once, what should our order of operations be? Or what might be some things that we can start to demonstrate value, show impact, or kind of do the build up that maturity over time? How have you seen customers start those conversations and develop them over time so that you do have a security program that they can point back to?
Yeah, I would say we used to joke there's a cloud security bingo, right? CSPM, CWPP, CNAPP, CIEM, CASB. Like, how many of these 3 to 4, 5-letter acronyms can there be in security? Well, the one that I think is quote unquote the winner right now as far as adding value, where people, if they try to create a blueprint, they can do it, is CNAPP. So Cloud Native Application Protection Platform. That's the one that seems like it's helping a lot of people right now.
And so then that is the approach that I think a little bit what you talked about, that artifact scanning, cloud configuration, runtime. So sort of it's maybe that kind of just maps to the SDLC lifecycle, if you will, the stages of it. But when we talk about CNAPP or something like that, how does that then, how do you pitch that in terms of like to the CISO or a VP of engineering, in the sense of, I don't think we can say we need to deploy CNAPP, but we need to deploy these types of capabilities, or we need to change our behaviors in this way. What do those kinds of conversations look like?
Well, I think, the first is taking stock in what CNAPP is really mapping out, right? And so if you look at those three major areas, you could argue everybody sort of dabbles in all three already. If you have an AppSec team, if you have an IT infrastructure team, if you have tools that kind of go from the gamut of API security, container security, all the way back to like code scanning or, DAST or SAST. So everybody has probably sprinklings of all these things, maybe in siloed teams or tools. The idea is, could we consolidate more of that and have it in a coordinated fashion, right? That's the harder problem, right? And by the way, it's not too different than when dev was a thing and they threw it over the fence to ops. Do you guys remember that? We used to write code, but the person who wrote the code had no idea what it took to actually put it into production. There was a time where we lived pre-DevOps where there was writers and then there was like maintainers and operators who kind of got stuff out into production. So they had to spend time figuring out how do you align this full stack engineer who could write it and ship it and do the whole thing. Well, security is kind of going through this same evolution. If you're just, let's say, a server guy, a container guy, operating systems hardening guy, but you actually have no idea how apps are written, you have no idea what the process is to get an app shipped, you're sort of a half of a full stack security engineer. Vice versa, if you're an AppSec person who knows how to pen test, who knows code scanning tools, SAST and DAST, but then when it comes to cloud infrastructure, you sort of get lost. When you start talking about API security, you're sort of getting lost. Then you're not also being a full stack security engineer because you're so app centric and not, the infrastructure side of it. So I think that's what's partly of what's going on. And what CNAPP allows people to do is go, look, here's the reality of what the program's going to probably have to be over the next 5 years. How long is it going to take us to not only merge the tools, but the teams and the processes in order to get there? And I think in the end, if you actually have a CNAPP program that's working pretty well, you probably have full stack security engineers who get along with the DevOps engineers. And if so if you have that, you're doing amazingly well. And I would say Netflix is a company who's done that, but they kind of grew up that way, right? They grew up in the world of DevOps and they grew up with the world of building massive infrastructure on top of public cloud services. And they did it in a multi-cloud way. I think Joe talked about it. Everybody thinks they're in single cloud, except once you let the developers actually innovate, they're going to use whatever tools help them innovate, right? Which usually is not one cloud to do it. So,
absolutely, and they did force themselves to stay cloud first by saying we're not going to invest in data centers. So that definitely helps. It definitely helps the mental model of approaching that. One of the aspects is that you're talking about full stack too, and there's my question here is my brain's thinking about the idea of specialization, because we've expected developers to go beyond just writing the code to understanding how the DevOps, as you pointed out, what's the environment it's running in, how do we spin up resources, thus they becoming some degree of expertise on what does networking look like in the cloud, are we containerizing this, are we putting this on an instance, or are we just doing this lambdas or some function as a service. So how do you see that type of specialization also working on the AppSec side or the security side? Because you mentioned too, there does seem to be a nice point, full stack DevOps engineer talking to a full stack AppSec engineer to do a lot of this automation. But are there other angles that we don't necessarily, that could still benefit from not being full stack or benefit from other types of specializations? Have you seen that work within security as well still?
Yeah, I mean, look, I think having specialized skills is important. And so here's an example. We have customers who are writing very deep custom rules as part of their automated pen testing, right? So whether it's attack surface management, you want to call it, right? We have customers who literally now have a new team called the ASM team, the attack surface management team. And so when you look at an ASM team, like what are they? They are trying to build automated pen testing type capabilities that are very specific to their apps and their logic, right? We talked about BOLA attacks when Himanshu was on here talking about shadow APIs. Well, if you really think about what BOLA is, right? And if you were a former pen tester, you're like, well, look, if you don't understand the business logic of how the app's going to work, how are you going to build an automated pen test attack on something that's super customized to a specific app, right? So I think that's where some specializations are starting to kick in, where you try to automate as much as you can, but at some point, this is unique to my code. And we always have a joke, right? There's like above the line and below the line in cloud. So below the line is like, let's say this is the API microservice that Amazon is selling. If it's below the line, that's their code. So anything that gets hacked deep in the infrastructure, right? I don't know if it's a BIOS attack or operating system attack and you're running a Lambda function, like you're never seeing Linux at that point. It's below the line. That's the cloud provider's core responsibility. But all the code you write on top of it it's hard to hold the cloud provider responsible. It's your code at the end of the day. So that's where I think these specialization skills are starting to kick in, where the security team has to understand their app construction and then also their risk appetite. I know this is another hard one. Like we talked about, like, you know, if you don't understand what your business folks' risk appetite really is, you don't know what kind of level of tolerance your organization will really live with, right? And so, and that's the balancing act. The moment you ship a piece of code or ship a feature, there is risk. It's on the internet, right? So the attacker sees that you've updated your app. These three new API calls were just added to the app, right? It's not like they're not going to go after those brand new 3 APIs because they're hoping it didn't get vetted, and that is probably going to be the easiest thing to break into, right? And so these are like basic attack strategies for hackers to monetize and steal data from you, right? So so I think, that's the specialization, is like we have to get really good on our own code side, our own app side, in order to be really strong for that DevOps team to value us. Because at the end of the day, that's what we need. We need the DevOps team to go, we're not trying to put the hand on security and say, just stay back. You guys are always slowing us down. It's like, no, you help us go faster because the tools you give us actually make us run safer and better. And then we move faster. And then they're like, welcome, come on, security guys, get in here, help us. I think and it happens. We've actually seen that happen. And sometimes it is those specialized skills that are the difference.
Yeah, and I know that any for our audience, if you're watching, there's someone who in the background of Doug that does want to run and has some opinions on our conversation here. So we won't keep you too long. Sorry, but Doug, you've been definitely polite. between Mike's cat and my dog, it's like. It's cats and dogs, man. Yes, but they are living together, as the Ghostbusters say. So, Doug, if we're trying to bring together the cats and dogs of AppSec and DevOps, is there perhaps a final message you'd like to leave with them? Either something that is a start with this, or have this in your back pocket as a reference, or automate this one thing. What's a good way just to start for teams, for organizations that want to go onto this good path?
Yeah, I'm going to cheat. My pro tip is a pro tip we've learned the hard way by working with lots of customers. Is the pro tip is, if you're trying to really strengthen the relationship between DevOps and security so that you guys really have that great foundation to do security in the cloud, maybe the supply chain is the first place to start. And what I mean by the software supply chain is really going after third party, right? Because here's the issue. When a security person is sort of bringing up vulns and bringing up config mistakes or problems on someone's app, that's kind of calling somebody's baby ugly at first, right? So what you do is, like, instead of going after the first party code or the first party start of what the development team has built, you go, no, this is about the third party. Like, you guys embedded this SDK, or you embedded this SDK that creates this third party API call that's running now on this third party cloud service. This isn't anything that you guys did wrong. You're just embedding, Google's SDK or Facebook's SDK into your app. But it creates this whole risk chain that if we're not properly patched or we're not properly configured, it creates an attack vector that we got to go now as a team go deal with. So it's not you guys or me, it's them. And so it kind of creates a bond initially between DevOps and security where they create value for each other. And it's sort of, I don't want to say an outsider, but it's an external entity that they both have to deal with and they both depend upon to be successful. So that's oftentimes we always say, like, if you're going to go after a DevSecOps project, software supply chain, your third-party vendors and your third-party SDKs and open source, it's actually a nice first project to bring everybody together.
Awesome. So. Well, thank you for coming together with us to talk about this, Doug. This was a great conversation.
Yeah. Thanks, Mike. Thanks, Joe. Thanks, John.
I want to thank Joe and John as well. Thank everybody who's listening. And thanks to Pooch over there. We'll let you free and give you Doug back in a moment because we're also going to take a quick break and return with news of the week.